Hello, and welcome back to another evening together. Tonight, we are going deep. Really deep. We're going to spend the next few hours working through every major mystery in the Dexter franchise, from the very first episode all the way through Resurrection. The unanswered questions, the dark secrets, the things the show hinted at but never quite explained, and the revelations that changed everything we thought we knew. If you're new here, the way this works is simple. Get comfortable, find a good position, and let me do the talking. If you fall asleep halfway through, that's not just okay, that's kind of the point. And if you stay awake for the whole thing, well, you're going to know more about Dexter Morgan's mysteries than most people who worked on the show. Before we get started, if you enjoy what I do here and want to support the channel, consider subscribing. It really does help, but that's the last time I'll mention it tonight. From here on out, it's just you, me, and a whole lot of unanswered questions about America's favorite serial killer. Now, a quick heads up, we are covering the entire franchise tonight. That means the original 8 seasons, New Blood, Original Sin, and Resurrection. If you haven't finished all of those and you care about spoilers, this is your warning. But honestly, this is a sleep video, so by the time we get to the really deep spoilers, there's a decent chance you'll already be dreaming about bloodslides and plastic wrap. And if so, no judgment whatsoever. Dexter premiered on Showtime on October 1st, 2006. It was based on Jeff Lindsay's novel Darkly Dreaming Dexter, published in 2004, and developed for television by James Manos Jr. What started as a single series has grown into something enormous. 8 seasons of the original show, totaling 96 episodes. New Blood gave us 10 more, Original Sin added another 10, and then Resurrection arrived with its own 10-episode first season and a second season already ordered. Michael C. Hall has been involved in every single iteration, either as the lead actor or providing the iconic inner monologue voiceover. That kind of commitment to a character over nearly 2 decades is rare in television, and it speaks to how much depth there is to explore in this world. So tonight we're going to explore all of it. We'll start at the very beginning with the event that created Dexter Morgan. Then we'll work our way through the mysteries of the ice truck killer, Harry's Code, and the man who built it. The Bay Harbor butcher case that never truly closed, the Trinity killer and his devastating impact, Deb's impossible journey, the people who discovered the truth and what happened to them, the nature of the dark passenger itself, the controversial endings, Dexter's rituals and methods, the near misses that almost exposed everything, the smaller mysteries most fans missed, and where the franchise is heading now. It's a lot, but we've got time. Let's start where it all started, in a shipping container covered in blood. The foundational mystery of the entire Dexter franchise is what happened inside that shipping container in the port of Miami, and how it transformed 2 small children into what they became. This is the origin story that everything else in the franchise builds on, and even after all these years and all these series, there are still pieces of it that remain genuinely unsettled. Here's what we know for certain. Laura Moser was a confidential informant working for the Miami Metro Police Department. More specifically, she was working for Detective Harry Morgan. She was feeding him information about drug operations, putting herself in danger to help build cases. But Laura and Harry's relationship wasn't just professional, they were lovers. Harry was married to Doris Morgan at the time, raising Deborah and carrying on this secret affair with his informant. That detail, which was revealed in season 2 and expanded in later seasons, reframes everything about Harry's motivations for the rest of the series. Laura's work as a CI eventually caught up with her. She was murdered by a group of drug dealers led by Hector Estrada, with Santos Jimenez among the killers. They butchered her with a chainsaw inside a shipping container at the port, and her 2 young sons were there. 2-year-old Dexter and 3-year-old Brian sat in their mother's blood for 2 full days before anyone found them. Think about that for a moment. 2 days, 2 toddlers alone in a metal box surrounded by the remains of their mother. When Harry finally arrived and opened that container, what he found changed the course of multiple lives. He adopted Dexter, Brian was initially taken in as well, but that arrangement didn't last. Original Sin finally showed us more of the aftermath. Brian briefly lived with the Morgan family, but he had a violent outburst that sealed his fate. He attempted to suffocate baby Deb in her crib. After that, Brian was removed from the home and placed into the foster care system. The brothers were separated, and they wouldn't reconnect until Brian returned as the ice truck killer decades later. Original Sin also confirmed something fans had wondered about for nearly 20 years. Both Dexter and Brian share the same biological father, a man named Joe Driscoll. Joe relinquished his custodial rights, essentially washing his hands of both boys. This solved a mystery that had lingered since season 1, when Dexter discovered Joe's existence and traveled to his biological father's home, only to find him already dead. Killed, as it turned out, by Brian. But here's the mystery within the mystery, and it's one the franchise keeps returning to without ever fully answering. What was Harry's true motivation? He adopted Dexter, but was it out of genuine love for the boy? Was it guilt over his role in Laura's death? After all, Harry was the one who recruited Laura as an informant. He put her in harm's way. His affair with her complicated everything. When she was killed, Harry bore at least some responsibility for putting her in that position. Some fans read Harry as a deeply loving father who made the best of an impossible situation. Others see him as a man driven by guilt, who made increasingly desperate choices to manage the consequences of his own mistakes. The truth is probably somewhere in between, and the franchise seems to know that because it keeps offering evidence for both readings without ever settling the debate. And then there's the biggest question of all, the one that sits at the heart of the entire Dexter mythology. Was Dexter born this way, or was he made? Did the shipping container trauma create his compulsion to kill? Or was there something already inside him that the trauma simply unlocked? Harry believed it was the trauma. He saw a broken child and tried to channel the damage into something structured, something controlled. Dr. Evelyn Vogel, who appeared in season 8, approached it differently. She believed Dexter's condition was something that could be studied, possibly even treated. She helped Harry create the code not as a cure, but as a management system, a way to direct impulses that couldn't be eliminated. The franchise has never fully committed to an answer, and honestly, I think that ambiguity is one of its greatest strengths. If Dexter was simply born a psychopath, then the tragedy is reduced to bad luck, a genetic roll of the dice. But if the shipping container made him, if that 2-day nightmare in his mother's blood was the thing that broke something fundamental inside a toddler's brain, then there's a deeper tragedy at work. It means Dexter could have been someone else. It means Harry's guilt is earned. It means the entire franchise is built on a preventable catastrophe. And that question extends to the next generation. Harrison Dexter's son was found as an infant sitting in a pool of his mother Rita's blood in the bathtub. The deliberate parallel to Dexter's own origin in the shipping container is unmistakable. The cycle repeating. If the shipping container created Dexter's darkness, did Rita's bathtub create Harrison's? New Blood and Resurrection both suggest the answer might be yes, but they're careful never to make it definitive. The shipping container is where everything begins. 2 children, their mother's blood, and a cop who opened a door and found himself responsible for a monster he would spend the rest of his life trying to control. But the shipping container didn't just create Dexter, it created someone else too. Someone who would come back to haunt him in the worst possible way and whose mysteries are still not fully resolved even now. Brian Moser, the ice truck killer, Dexter's biological brother. If the shipping container is the franchise's original sin, then Brian is its first ghost. He was 3 years old when he watched his mother die. 1 year older than Dexter, which means he would have understood more of what was happening. He would have had more fully formed memories of the chainsaw, the blood, the screaming, the 2 days of silence afterward. And unlike Dexter, who was adopted by Harry and given structure, Brian was thrown into the foster care system after the incident with baby Deb. He was essentially discarded. The original series left almost Brian's entire adult history unexplained, and that's one of the franchise's most fascinating gaps. We know that Brian eventually assumed the identity of Rudy Cooper, a prosthetic limb specialist. He told Deb in a throwaway line that the real Rudy Cooper died for a good cause, which implies he murdered someone and stole their identity. But how did he get the qualifications? Did he actually go to medical school under a false name? Did he falsify credentials? The show never explains this, and it's the kind of practical detail that would take years of effort in real life. Brian's reason for coming to Miami was deeply personal and deeply disturbing. He wasn't just killing people. He was trying to reconnect with his brother. He dated Deborah Morgan, Dexter's adoptive sister, as a way to get close to Dexter after Harry's death. Think about the psychological implications of that. He pursued a romantic relationship with his own brother's sister, the daughter of the man who adopted Dexter but abandoned Brian. Every date, every conversation, every intimate moment was a manipulation designed to position himself closer to the one person he felt connected to. Original Sin added new layers to Brian's story. We learned that Brian had been stalking Dexter even before the events of Original Sin's timeline, and that Harry had intercepted him. Brian's return in Original Sin's later episodes as the NHI killer, the killer of people Harry had deemed not human enough to warrant protection, added a dark mirror dimension to the relationship. Brian was doing what Dexter did, but without the code, without rules, without Harry's leash. And then there's the Joe Driscoll revelation. Original Sin confirmed that Joe was the biological father of both brothers. When Brian killed Joe in Season 1, fans initially read it as a strategic move, eliminating someone who might lead Dexter to questions Brian wasn't ready to answer. But with the Original Sin confirmation that Joe abandoned both boys, Brian's killing of their father takes on a different dimension entirely. It wasn't just strategy, it was revenge. Revenge for being thrown away by the one person who should have fought for them. The Season 1 finale presented Dexter with the most important choice of the entire franchise. Brian wanted them to kill together, to be a family, to embrace what the shipping container had made them without codes or rules or pretending to be normal. He even gave Dexter a gift of sorts by capturing Deb and presenting her as a potential victim, a symbolic rejection of the adopted family in favor of blood. Dexter chose his adoptive family. He killed Brian. And that single decision echoes through every season that follows. It established that Dexter would always choose the life Harry built for him over the darkness he was born into. But was it the right choice? Brian was a monster, certainly, but he was also a victim, a child who watched his mother die and was then abandoned by everyone who should have protected him. If Harry had adopted both boys, if Brian had been given the code too, would things have been different? The franchise has never answered that question directly, but it keeps asking it. Brian appears as a hallucination in Season 6 during the Nebraska episode, where he represents Dexter's darkest impulses, the version of himself that exists without the code's restrictions. Ghost Brian is funny, reckless, cruel, and free. He's everything Dexter might have been without Harry's intervention. And part of Dexter is clearly drawn to that freedom, even as he ultimately rejects it. Brian's mysteries extend beyond his own story. His existence raises questions about the entire framework the franchise is built on. If two children can be exposed to the same trauma, and one becomes a serial killer with a code while the other becomes a serial killer without one, what does that say about the code itself? Is it a moral framework, or is it just a different flavor of damage? Dexter chose his adoptive family over his brother, but the man who built that family, the man who gave Dexter the code, had secrets of his own. And those secrets might be the biggest mystery in the entire show. Harry Morgan, the man who made a monster, or depending on how you look at it, the man who saved one. Harry is presented as a hero throughout most of the original series. In flashbacks, we see a loving father struggling with an impossible situation. His adopted son has violent urges that can't be suppressed. Rather than turning Dexter over to institutions or giving up entirely, Harry creates the code. A set of rules that channels Dexter's compulsions into something that, on the surface at least, does less harm than it might otherwise. Don't get caught. Only kill people who are guilty of murder and have escaped the justice system. Take trophies carefully, maintain your cover. It sounds almost reasonable when you describe it that way. A father finding the least terrible option for a child who has no good options. But the deeper you dig into Harry's story, the more the heroic narrative falls apart. For starters, Harry didn't create the code alone. Season 8 revealed that Dr. Evelyn Vogel, a neuropsychiatrist who specialized in studying psychopaths, helped Harry design the entire framework. Vogel had her own academic interest in Dexter. She saw him as a subject, a proof of concept for her theories about channeling psychopathic behavior. The code wasn't just a father's desperate improvisation. It was a clinical experiment conducted on a child. This reframes everything. Every flashback of Harry teaching young Dexter to fake emotions, to read social cues, to select victims carefully, all of it was influenced by a woman with a professional stake in the outcome. When Dexter follows the code successfully, it validates Vogel's research. When he deviates, it's a data point. The love Harry had for Dexter was real, but it was also tangled up in a collaboration with a scientist who viewed his son as a case study. And then there's Harry's death. For most of the series, viewers believed Harry died of heart disease, but Season 2 revealed the truth, and it's devastating. Harry committed suicide. He overdosed on his heart medication. He killed himself after walking in on Dexter dismembering a victim named Rhinus. Despite building the code, despite spending years grooming Dexter to kill in a controlled way, Harry could not handle the reality of what he'd created. His last words to Dexter were, "Stay away." The same words that Dokes would later use in the cabin, triggering Dexter's flashback to that terrible moment and the awful realization that Harry's death was his fault. Or at least that's how Dexter experienced it. Captain Matthews buried the autopsy report to protect both Dexter and Deb from the truth. Another secret layered on top of secrets. Another authority figure deciding that the truth was too dangerous to share. Original Sin raised yet another question about Harry's final days. Did Brian confront Harry before his death? The show implied that Brian had been in contact, stalking the family, making his presence known. Could Brian's reappearance have contributed to Harry's mental state? Could knowing that the other boy, the one he'd abandoned to foster care, was out there and possibly dangerous, have pushed Harry closer to the edge? The most psychologically honest moment in the entire franchise might be the conversation between Dexter and Harry's ghost in Season 8. Dexter says the dark passenger controls him, that it's a force inside him that demands blood. Harry challenges this directly. He says he gave Dexter the code, but the dark passenger concept was entirely Dexter's invention. Dexter coined the term when he was about 12 years old, and Harry let it slide because a child shouldn't have to bear the full weight of his own nature. But then Harry says the quiet part out loud. It sure is a whole lot simpler to just pin all the blame on something else, isn't it, Dexter? It's much scarier to think that the dark passenger is no more real than I am. If there's no dark passenger, then Dexter is responsible for everything he's done. Every kill, every manipulation, every lie. The code doesn't excuse it. Harry's training doesn't excuse it. It's all on Dexter. And that's a terrifying realization for a character who has spent his entire life believing he's being driven by something outside himself. Was Harry right to create the code? Or did he create something worse than what would have existed without his intervention? A Dexter without the code might have been caught earlier. He might have killed fewer people. He might have been institutionalized as a teenager and received actual treatment. Instead, Harry built a perfect predator and gave him a moral framework that made him believe he was doing good. That's either the greatest act of love in television history or the most catastrophic failure of parenting ever depicted. Harry's code kept Dexter alive and out of prison for decades, but there's one case where the entire system nearly collapsed. One investigation that came closer than any other to exposing everything. The Bay Harbor Butcher case. Season 2 built the entire storyline around this, and it remains one of the most gripping investigations in the franchise. But the mystery of the Bay Harbor Butcher extends far beyond a single season. It's a thread that runs through the original series, through New Blood, and straight into Resurrection. And to this day, the public in the Dexter universe still has it wrong. It started when divers discovered an underwater graveyard off the coast of Miami. Garbage bags full of dismembered body parts, weighted down and dropped into the ocean from a boat. Dexter's dumping ground, the place where he'd been disposing of his victims for years, had been exposed by ocean currents, shifting the bags into shallower water. The press gave the unknown killer a name, the Bay Harbor Butcher. And suddenly, the biggest serial killer investigation in Miami's history was happening inside the same police department where the killer worked. FBI Special Agent Frank Lundy was brought in to lead the task force. Lundy was brilliant, methodical, patient. He approached the case like a puzzle, and he was genuinely good at solving puzzles. He identified patterns in the victims, recognized that they all had criminal records, and theorized that the butcher was operating with some kind of moral code. A twisted set of principles, as he described it. He was right about everything except the identity of the killer. But it was Sergeant James Dokes who came the closest. Dokes was the one person at Miami Metro whose instincts about Dexter were spot on from the very beginning. He couldn't articulate what was wrong, not at first, but he felt it. He followed Dexter. He watched him at crime scenes. He tracked his movements. And eventually, he caught Dexter in a compromising situation, trailing him to the cabin in the Everglades where Dexter had stashed one of his victims. Dokes was right, and being right got him killed. Lila West, Dexter's unhinged girlfriend from Season 2, tracked down the cabin and blew it up with Dokes inside. When the investigation found Dokes' remains alongside evidence of the butcher's activities, including blood-slides, the case was closed. James Dokes, a veteran detective who had served his department with distinction, was posthumously framed as the Bay Harbor Butcher. The injustice of that has haunted the franchise ever since. An innocent man's reputation was destroyed. His legacy was turned into that of a serial killer, and nobody in a position of authority ever corrected it, even though several people had reason to doubt the official story. LaGuerta was the first to push back. She knew Dokes, she trusted him, and in Season 7 she reopened the case. She found a bloodslide at the church where Dexter had killed Travis Marshall. She connected it to Dexter. She linked Dexter to his brother Brian, the ice truck killer. She was building an airtight case, the kind of case that would have exposed everything. LaGuerta was doing exactly what a good detective should do, following the evidence wherever it led, regardless of how uncomfortable the destination. And for that, she died. Deborah shot LaGuerta in the Season 7 finale to protect Dexter. It's the darkest moment in the original series, the point where Deb crossed a line she could never uncross. A good cop was murdered to protect a serial killer, and the person who pulled the trigger was another cop who had sworn to uphold the law. New Blood picked up this thread years later. At a law enforcement conference, Angel Batista gave a speech about Dexter, reminiscing fondly about his former colleague. He couldn't even remember Harrison's name immediately. If Batista knew Dexter was the butcher, he wouldn't have been standing up there telling warm stories about him. But Angela Bishop, the police chief of Iron Lake, overheard the speech and started connecting dots. She linked Dexter, who was living under the alias Jim Lindsay, to the Bay Harbor Butcher case through Molly Park's true crime podcast research, and the discovery that local bodies had ketamine injection marks matching the butcher's M.O. Resurrection pushed even further. Batista finally began acting on years of buried suspicion. He traveled to New York following leads, digging into the case that had been closed for over a decade. But before he could go public, before he could tell the world that James Dokes was innocent and Dexter Morgan was the real Bay Harbor butcher. He was killed. Not by Dexter, but by Leon Prater, another serial killer entirely. Batista's death is one of the franchise's most emotionally devastating losses because it represented the last, best chance for justice. And as of the end of Resurrection Season 1, the general public still believes Dokes was the Bay Harbor butcher. Quinn, however, left a voicemail for Batista asking about his investigation, which suggests Quinn may follow Batista's trail in Season 2. The case that was closed in Season 2 of the original series has never truly been closed. The truth is still out there, still waiting. The Bay Harbor butcher case is the thread that runs through the entire franchise. But there's one killer who haunted Dexter more than any other. One adversary who cost Dexter everything he cared about, Arthur Mitchell, the Trinity Killer, played by John Lithgow in what many consider one of the greatest television villain performances ever committed to screen. To understand why Trinity matters so much, you have to understand what made him different from every other antagonist in the series. Most of Dexter's enemies were either colleagues who got too close to the truth or criminals who crossed his path by chance. Trinity was something else entirely. He was a mirror, a dark reflection of what Dexter desperately wanted to be. A serial killer who successfully maintained a family. For decades, law enforcement believed Trinity killed in cycles of 3. A young woman bled out in a bathtub representing Arthur's sister, whose suicide he witnessed as a child. A mother forced to jump from a building, representing his own mother who had killed herself. A father bludgeoned to death, representing Arthur's abusive father. 3 kills, then a cool-down period, then the cycle began again. Agent Lundy spent years tracking this pattern, but Dexter discovered the truth that Lundy had missed. There were 4 victims in each cycle, not 3. Before the bathtub, the building, and the bludgeoning, Arthur always kidnapped and murdered a 10-year-old boy. This 4th victim represented Arthur's own lost innocence, the child he could never be again after watching his sister die. The reason Lundy missed it was practical and tragic. Missing children aren't always reported as homicides. A disappearing 10-year-old doesn't automatically connect to the ritualistic murder of 3 adults. The pattern was hidden in plain sight. Arthur's double life was one of the show's most disturbing creations. On the surface, he was a pillar of the community. He volunteered with 4 Walls, 1 Heart, building homes for families in need. He had a wife, Sally, 2 children, Rebecca and Jonah. He went to church. He smiled at neighbors. He was the kind of man you'd trust to watch your kids. Behind closed doors, the Mitchell family lived in constant terror. Arthur was violently abusive. His son Jonah flinched at sudden movements. His wife Sally had learned to walk on eggshells, to manage Arthur's moods, to never challenge him. His daughter Rebecca was controlled to the point of suffocation. The family dinner scenes in Season 4 are some of the most uncomfortable television ever produced, because the violence is implied more than shown. You see the fear in everyone's eyes. You see the forced smiles. You see what happens when a monster pretends to be a father. Dexter's fatal mistake was hesitation. When he first identified Arthur as the Trinity Killer, Dexter didn't kill him immediately. Instead, he studied him. He was fascinated. Here was proof that a serial killer could maintain a family, hold down a normal life, keep up appearances for decades. Dexter wanted to learn from Arthur before destroying him. He even joined 4 Walls, 1 Heart to get closer, building houses alongside the man he intended to kill. That hesitation cost Rita her life. The Season 4 finale, The Getaway, contains the single most devastating moment in the entire franchise. Dexter comes home after finally killing Arthur. He's victorious. Trinity is dead. The threat is over. And then he walks into the bathroom and finds Rita in the bathtub, bled out, with baby Harrison sitting in a pool of her blood. The deliberate parallel to Dexter's own origin is unmistakable. A child sitting in his mother's blood. The shipping container repeating itself 1 generation later. Arthur killed Rita using his own signature method, the bathtub kill that represented his dead sister, and left Harrison alive in the blood as a message. A cruel, calculated echo of the trauma that created Dexter in the first place. That image, that final shot of season 4, is what gives the rest of the franchise its weight. Everything that happens to Harrison afterward, every hint of violence, every suggestion of inherited darkness traces back to that bathtub. Just as everything about Dexter traces back to the shipping container. Season 6 revealed the Mitchell family's aftermath. Sally was bludgeoned, Rebecca was killed in a bathtub, Jonah was the only survivor. Dexter traveled to Nebraska to investigate, initially suspecting that Jonah had followed in his father's footsteps and started killing family members. The truth turned out to be more complicated and more human. Jonah had snapped under the weight of his father's legacy, but he wasn't a serial killer. He was a traumatized young man who had been pushed past his breaking point. The Trinity Killer prequel series has been announced, which tells you everything about how the franchise views Arthur Mitchell. His story isn't over. His early murders in the 1970s, the origins of his ritual, the formation of his cycle, all of that is apparently rich, enough to warrant its own series. Trinity's mysteries are far from fully explored. Trinity took Rita, but the ripple effects of that night extended far beyond one death. It changed Harrison forever. It changed Deb, and it set in motion everything that would eventually destroy Dexter's world, which brings us to Deborah Morgan. And honestly, I think Deb's arc might be the most tragic story in the entire franchise. Deb started the series as Dexter's foul-mouthed, good-hearted adoptive sister, a vice cop who wanted nothing more than to be a great detective, to live up to Harry's legacy, and to find someone who loved her. She was messy and emotional and real in a show built around a protagonist who felt nothing. Deb was the heart of Dexter, even when the show didn't realize it. Her journey from unsuspecting sister to Dexter's accomplice to his victim is a masterclass in slow-motion tragedy. Every season pushed her a little closer to the truth, gave her a few more reasons to question what was happening around her, and she never quite put the pieces together until the moment the show forced her to. The discovery happened in the season 6 finale. Deb walked into a church and found Dexter killing Travis Marshall. There was no ambiguity, no possible misinterpretation. She saw her brother, the person she loved most in the world, plunging a knife into another human being. Season 7 explored the impossible aftermath. Deb ran from Dexter's apartment and vomited in the street. When Dexter caught up to her, she wouldn't let him touch her. She asked how long he'd been doing this. Dexter told her since he was 20 that he only killed certain kinds of people, and that Harry taught him a code. Learning that her father, her hero, knew about it and helped create it was almost worse than learning about Dexter himself. Deb tried to manage the situation. She moved Dexter into her apartment, essentially putting him on serial killer rehab. She set rules. She demanded honesty. She asked devastating questions. Are you even capable of love? She connected the dots to everything. The ice truck killer was Dexter's brother. Trinity killed Rita. The Bay Harbor butcher case was closed on Dokes, but it should have been Dexter. And then came the moment that broke her. LaGuerta had built her case. She was going to expose Dexter. And in the shipping container at the port, with LaGuerta and Dexter both present, Deb made her choice. She shot LaGuerta. Not Dexter. She killed a good cop to protect a serial killer because that serial killer was her brother. Season 8 showed what that choice did to her. Deb spiraled into drinking. She could barely function. She nearly confessed multiple times. The guilt was eating her alive, and no amount of rationalization could make it stop. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and she knew it. Her death is the most emotionally devastating scene Michael C. Hall has ever played. Shot by the brain surgeon, Deb suffered a fatal stroke. Dexter disconnected her from life support and carried her body out of the hospital. He buried her at sea in the same waters where he had dumped his victims. The woman who loved him most, who sacrificed everything for him, ended up in the same place as the people he killed. In New Blood, Deb replaced Harry as Dexter's internal voice. But unlike Harry, who had guided Dexter toward the code, Ghost Deb was antagonistic. She challenged him, she confronted him, she called him out on his lies and rationalizations. She represented his guilt, the part of him that knew what he'd cost her. And the fact that Deb's ghost was angrier, more combative, and more honest than Harry's ghost tells you everything about the difference between what Harry built and what Deb endured. The question that lingers over Deb's entire arc is whether she ever truly accepted what Dexter was. In Season 7, she told him she couldn't condone his actions, but understood the code might be a necessary evil. But was that acceptance, or was it survival? Was she making peace with her brother's nature, or was she telling herself whatever she needed to believe in order to keep functioning? I don't think the show ever gives us a clean answer, and I think that's intentional, because the truth about Deb is that she loved Dexter more than she loved justice, more than she loved the law, and more than she loved herself. And that love destroyed her, not because love is wrong, but because the person she loved was Dexter Morgan. And loving Dexter Morgan has consequences. Deb's story is a tragedy of love and loyalty pushed past the breaking point. But she wasn't the only person who got close to Dexter's truth and paid for it. In fact, there's a grim pattern that runs through the entire franchise. Almost everyone who discovers what Dexter really is either dies or is permanently damaged by the knowledge. Let's walk through them all, because when you line them up, the body count of people who simply knew the truth is staggering. Harry Morgan knew from the very beginning. He saw the signs when Dexter was a child. He found the buried animals. He recognized the urges. And rather than seek professional help or turn to the system, he built the code and trained his son to kill with discipline. Harry knew everything, and the weight of that knowledge killed him. He committed suicide after witnessing the reality of what his code produced in practice. The man who created Dexter's framework for killing could not survive seeing it in action. Brian Moser knew because he was the same. Born from the same trauma, shaped by the same shipping container. Brian didn't discover Dexter's secret so much as he shared it. He recognized a kindred spirit and wanted to build something together. A family of killers, free from codes and constraints. Dexter killed him for it, choosing his adopted family over his blood. Brian is the first person in the franchise to die specifically because of what he knew and what he wanted to do with that knowledge. Lila West discovered the truth in Season 2. She was Dexter's sponsor in the Narcotics Anonymous meetings he attended as cover, and she became romantically involved with him. Lila was unstable, possessive, and genuinely dangerous. But she also saw Dexter more clearly than almost anyone else in the series up to that point. She recognized the darkness in him and was drawn to it. When she found Dokes in the cabin, she killed him, not to protect justice or serve the code, but to protect her relationship with Dexter. She blew up the cabin with Dokes inside, framing him as the butcher and giving Dexter an escape he didn't orchestrate. Dexter repaid her by following her to Paris and killing her. Lila's discovery of the truth lasted only a short time, but her actions in that window changed the entire course of the series. James Dokes suspected Dexter long before anyone else. He couldn't prove it for most of their working relationship, but his instincts were flawless. Dokes followed Dexter, confronted him, tracked his movements, and eventually caught him near the cabin in the Everglades. Dokes was the first person at Miami Metro to see clearly, and for that he was framed as a serial killer and blown up. His legacy was erased, replaced with a lie that the department chose to believe because the alternative was too uncomfortable. Dokes died because he was right. Miguel Prado learned Dexter's secret in Season 3 and tried to become a killing partner. Miguel was an assistant district attorney who saw criminals escape justice through legal technicalities. When he discovered what Dexter did, he didn't recoil. He was fascinated. He wanted in. The two men began killing together, with Miguel selecting targets from his legal cases. But Miguel crossed the lines that the code drew. He killed someone who didn't fit the code. He became sloppy. And when Dexter realized that Miguel couldn't be controlled, he killed him too. Miguel's story is a cautionary tale about what happens when you give the code to someone who doesn't have the discipline to follow it. Lumen Pierce is one of the few people who knew Dexter's truth and survived. She was a victim of a group of men who kidnapped, raped, and tortured women. Dexter rescued her, and together they hunted down her attackers. Lumen's dark passenger, her need for revenge, was real but temporary. Once the last of her abusers was dead, the compulsion faded. She left Miami peacefully. But here's the question the show never answered. Where is Lumen now? She knows what Dexter is. She participated in multiple killings alongside him. She's one of the few people alive who could confirm the Bay Harbor Butcher's identity. And the franchise has never revisited her. Deborah Morgan discovered the truth in the season 6 finale and spent the remaining seasons being consumed by it. She killed Lagerta. She spiraled into self-destruction. She died in a hospital bed. We've already covered her story, but it bears repeating in this context because Deb is the clearest example of what Dexter's truth does to the people who carry it. Hannah McKay knew Dexter's secret and was, in many ways, his most compatible partner. She was a serial killer herself, a poisoner who had killed multiple people before meeting Dexter. Their relationship was built on mutual recognition. Neither had to hide from the other. Hannah survived the original series, fleeing to Argentina with Harrison after Dexter's faked death. Her status after resurrection is unclear, but she's another person who knew everything and managed to stay alive, at least as far as we know. Dr. Evelyn Vogel helped create the code and understood Dexter's psychology on a clinical level. She arrived in season 8 as both a mother figure and a scientist, someone who had helped shape Dexter's entire existence from behind the scenes. She was killed by the brain surgeon, her own biological son, Daniel, in one of the season's most disturbing turns. Vogel created the framework that made Dexter possible, and she died at the hands of a killer she also created. Maria Lagerta investigated the Bay Harbor Butcher case, built a compelling case against Dexter, and was shot by Deb before she could go public. Lagerta was the closest thing to justice the franchise ever produced. She followed the evidence, she trusted her instincts, and she was right. Her reward was a bullet. Angela Bishop in New Blood connected Dexter to the Bay Harbor Butcher through Batista's conference speech, Molly Park's podcast research, and local forensic evidence. She's one of the few people in the franchise who put the pieces together independently and survived. As of Resurrection, her investigation has stalled, but she's still out there, still knowing Harrison Morgan is the latest person to confront Dexter's truth. He shot his father in the New Blood finale, and Resurrection revealed that Dexter survived. Harrison now carries the weight of knowing what his father is, having participated in a kill himself, and having pulled the trigger in an attempt to end the cycle. He's dealing with his own dark impulses while trying to outrun his father's legacy. Angel Batista finally began investigating Dexter in Resurrection, following up on suspicions that had simmered for years. He traveled to New York, he was getting close, and then Leon Prater killed him before he could share what he had found. Batista's death feels especially cruel because he was the most fundamentally decent person in the franchise. He deserved better than a death in someone else's serial killer story. And then there's Joey Quinn. Quinn suspected Dexter in season 5. He hired Stan Liddy, a disgraced former cop, to conduct surveillance. Liddy gathered evidence, including photos and recordings. But Dexter killed Liddy, and Quinn, upon seeing blood on Dexter's shoe, chose to look the other way. Partly for Deb's sake, partly because he didn't want to know the truth badly enough to pursue it. Quinn is the franchise's most fascinating loose end. He backed away from the truth once, but the voicemail he left for Batista in Resurrection suggests he might not back away a second time. The pattern is clear, and it's grim. Knowing Dexter's truth is one of the most dangerous things a person can do in this fictional universe. The knowledge doesn't set you free. It either kills you, corrupts you, or forces you to spend the rest of your life carrying a weight that never gets lighter. Now, speaking of things that never get fully resolved, let's talk about the Dark Passenger itself, because this is maybe the most philosophically interesting mystery in the entire franchise, and the show's treatment of it has been deliberately ambiguous from the very beginning. The Dark Passenger is Dexter's term for his compulsion to kill. He describes it as an entity, a force that lives inside him, a separate presence that demands blood and won't take no for an answer. When the Dark Passenger is driving, Dexter feels alive. When he tries to suppress it, he feels hollow, restless, incomplete. In Jeff Lindsay's novels, the source material for the show, the Dark Passenger was eventually revealed to be a literal, supernatural entity. An ancient, dark spirit that inhabited Dexter and controlled his urges. The television series explicitly rejected this interpretation in favor of psychological realism. There are no ghosts, no demons, no possession in the show's world. Harry's ghost and the other hallucinations are products of Dexter's own mind, not supernatural visitations. But the show was careful to never fully explain what the Dark Passenger actually is. Is it a personality disorder, a trauma response, a dissociative state, a metaphor? All of those readings are supported by different moments in the series, and none of them is definitively confirmed. The most important conversation about the Dark Passenger happens in Season 8, between Dexter and his father's ghost. It's the one I mentioned earlier, where Harry tells Dexter that the code was Harry's creation, but the Dark Passenger was Dexter's. Dexter invented it around age 12 as a way to externalize his urges, to separate himself from the things he wanted to do. Harry let it go because a 12-year-old shouldn't have to carry the full weight of knowing he's a killer. But the ghost of Harry is blunt about what this means. If there's no Dark Passenger, then I'm responsible for everything I've done. That single line might be the most important sentence in the entire franchise. Because if the Dark Passenger is just a name Dexter gave to his own desires, if it's a psychological defense mechanism rather than a genuine separate entity, then the entire moral framework of the show shifts. Every kill becomes a choice, not a compulsion. Every victim is someone Dexter chose to kill because he wanted to, not because something inside him forced his hand. The Dark Passenger manifests differently throughout the franchise, and each version reflects what Dexter is struggling with at that point in his life. In the original series, Harry's ghost represents the code, the rules, the structure. Harry's voice tells Dexter to be careful, to follow the rules, to maintain his cover. When Brian appears as a hallucination in Season 6, he represents the opposite. The freedom of killing without rules, the temptation to abandon the code entirely. In New Blood, Deb's ghost represents guilt, the accumulated moral weight of everything Dexter has done to the people who loved him. And in Resurrection, Harry returns, suggesting that Dexter is cycling back to basics, trying to find structure again after years of chaos. Harrison adds another dimension. Does he have a Dark Passenger of his own? New Blood strongly suggested that he does. He attacked a classmate named Ethan at school, and Dexter's forensic analysis suggested Harrison was the aggressor, not the defender he claimed to be. Harrison kept a straight razor similar to the one Arthur Mitchell used to kill Rita. He helped Dexter kill Kurt Caldwell, but in the New Blood finale, Harrison drew a line. He said, "I'm only like this because of you, not because I am like you. Is that true?" Resurrection suggests it's more complicated than Harrison wants to believe. His darkness may not be identical to Dexter's, but it's there. And the franchise is clearly interested in exploring whether the cycle of violence can be broken or whether some damage is permanent. There's a related question that the show explored briefly through Lumen Pierce. If the Dark Passenger can fade, as Lumen's did after her revenge was complete, does that mean it's not permanent? Does that mean Dexter's could theoretically fade too? Or was Lumen's situation fundamentally different? She was traumatized as an adult, and her compulsion was tied to specific people who had hurt her. Dexter was traumatized as a toddler, and his compulsion is generalized, attached to the act of killing itself rather than to specific targets. Maybe some dark passengers can be healed and some can't. The franchise leaves this open. The dark passenger question leads us to maybe the most debated mystery in the entire franchise. The one that divided fans for years, the one that the show's own creators admitted they got wrong, and the one that the franchise has been trying to fix ever since. The original ending, The Lumberjack, Season 8. The Season 8 finale, Remember the Monsters, is one of the most controversial endings in the history of television. And I don't use that phrase lightly. There are endings that audiences disagree about. There are endings that provoke debate. And then there's the Dexter finale, which provokes something closer to collective fury. Here's what happened. Dexter faked his death by driving his boat, the slice of life, directly into a hurricane. Before that, he disconnected Deborah from life support after she suffered a fatal stroke following her gunshot wound. He carried her body out of the hospital, wrapped in a sheet, and buried her at sea from his boat. Hannah and Harrison flew to Argentina to start a new life, believing Dexter was dead. And then the final shot. Dexter, alive, sitting in what appeared to be a cabin in Oregon or the Pacific Northwest. He had grown a beard. He was working as a lumberjack. He looked into the camera with dead, empty eyes. And the episode ended. The immediate reaction was disbelief, then anger. Fans had spent 8 seasons following this character, investing in his journey, debating his morality, and the show's final statement was that Dexter would simply continue to exist, alone, stripped of everyone he cared about, working a manual labor job in the woods, without consequence, without resolution, without justice or redemption. Just a lumberjack staring. Showrunner Scott Buck's vision for the ending was apparently meant to convey that Dexter had sentenced himself to a kind of living death, exile from everything and everyone, as punishment for what he'd done to Deb. The problem was that the execution didn't convey this clearly, and many viewers read it as Dexter getting away with everything, which felt like a betrayal of the show's own themes. Clyde Phillips, who had been the showrunner for the widely beloved first 4 seasons, later revealed in interviews what his original ending would have been. In Phillips' version, Dexter would have been on death row, about to be executed. In his final moments, he would hallucinate that all the people he'd killed were sitting in the gallery watching. The camera would pull back to reveal the execution chamber, and the audience would understand that this was always where Dexter's story had to end. That ending was never produced, but its existence became a kind of cultural benchmark for what the show could have been. The backlash was so severe and so sustained that it directly led to New Blood being greenlit. The franchise essentially admitted that the original ending didn't work and offered a do-over. New Blood placed Dexter in Iron Lake, New York, living under the alias Jim Lindsay, having suppressed his killing urges for about a decade. Harrison's arrival reignited the Dark Passenger, and the season built toward a different kind of ending. New Blood's ending was also controversial, but in a different way. Harrison shot Dexter, seemingly killing him, and fled Iron Lake. It was meant to be definitive, the son ending the cycle by ending the father. But Resurrection revealed that Dexter survived the gunshot and was resuscitated in an emergency room. So the franchise has now effectively overwritten both controversial endings. The Lumberjack was retconned by New Blood. Harrison's gunshot was retconned by Resurrection. Dexter keeps surviving, which raises the meta-mystery that hangs over the entire franchise. Will Dexter ever be allowed a definitive ending? With Resurrection Season 2 ordered and potentially more seasons planned, with a Trinity Killer prequel in development, the Dexter universe is actively expanding. The story keeps going. The endings keep being rewritten. At some point, the franchise will have to decide whether Dexter lives, dies, or something in between. But that point clearly is not yet. The endings keep changing, but the questions keep piling up. And some of the most fascinating mysteries in this franchise aren't the big, dramatic ones. They're the details, the rituals, the The practical questions about how Dexter actually did what he did for so many years without anyone noticing. Let's talk about the blood slides because they represent one of Dexter's most distinctive and most dangerous habits. After every kill, Dexter took a blood slide from his victim's cheek. A single drop of blood on a glass slide, collected with the precision of a forensic analyst. He stored these slides in a wooden box, which he hid inside the air conditioning unit in his apartment. Each slide was a trophy, a record, proof that the kill had happened and that Dexter had followed the code. The slides are fascinating because they serve no practical purpose. They don't help Dexter avoid detection. They don't provide useful information. If anything, they're the single most dangerous piece of evidence he maintains. A box of blood slides from dozens of murder victims hidden in a serial killer's apartment is about as incriminating as physical evidence gets, and yet Dexter can't stop collecting them. In Season 2, the slides survived even after Dexter's underwater dumping ground was discovered. The bags of body parts were found. The Bay Harbor butcher investigation was launched. And Dexter still had his slides. He came terrifyingly close to being exposed when Dokes found the box. The slides were eventually planted in Dokes' car by Lila, sealing the false narrative that Dokes was the butcher. Season 7 brought the slides back in the most dramatic way possible. Dexter dropped a blood slide at the church where he killed Travis Marshall. LaGuerta found it. She had it tested. It belonged to Marshall. And from that single piece of evidence, she began rebuilding the entire Bay Harbor butcher case. This time with Dexter as the prime suspect. One slide. That's all it took to nearly unravel everything. The moment when Deb confronted Dexter in his apartment with his kill tools and blood slide box spread out on the coffee table is one of the most quietly devastating scenes in the series. She asked, "Did you kill all those people?" And Dexter said, "I did." Then she asked if he was a serial killer. "Yes." Without qualifications or explanations, just the truth, finally, after years of lies. Original Sin was expected to show how Dexter developed the blood slide ritual. Where did the compulsion come from? When did he start? What was the first slide? The show was building toward those answers, but its cancellation in August 2025 means fans may never get to see the origin of this specific habit. Clyde Phillips had teased that the ritual's development would be a significant plot point. Now it's one of the franchise's lost mysteries. The slides represent something deeper psychologically. Dexter needs proof that his kills happened, that they were real. Without the slides, the kills become abstract, memories that could be doubted or denied. The slides make them concrete. They make Dexter feel something. In a world where he struggles to connect with anything emotionally, the blood slides are his most personal possession. They're more real to him than most of his relationships. The slides aren't the only ritual that raises questions. Let's talk about the kill room itself, because the logistics of what Dexter does on a regular basis are genuinely mind-boggling when you think about them practically. The standard Dexter kill follows a specific sequence. He identifies a target. He verifies that they're guilty, usually by accessing police databases and conducting his own investigation. He stalks them, learning their routine. He prepares a location, covering it entirely in plastic sheeting to prevent blood evidence. He tranquilizes the victim, originally using M99 and later switching to ketamine. He places them on a table, wraps them in plastic, and arranges photographs of their victims around the room. He confronts them, allowing them to see the evidence of their crimes before he kills them. Then he takes a blood slide, dismembers the body, bags the pieces, loads them into his car, drives to the marina, boards the slice of life, motors out to deep water, and dumps the bags. That's a lot of steps, and every single one of them involves risk. Where does Dexter get industrial quantities of plastic sheeting? The show implies he buys it from hardware stores, but buying that much plastic wrap that frequently would eventually raise questions. Where does he get the tranquilizers? For most of the series, he stole M99 from the Miami Metro evidence room, which is technically possible, but requires falsifying records repeatedly without anyone noticing. The ketamine switch in later seasons and New Blood created its own set of questions. The kill table is another practical mystery. Dexter sets up elaborate kill rooms in abandoned buildings, empty warehouses, isolated locations. He covers everything in plastic, sets up a table, installs lighting, and arranges the victims' photos. This takes time, hours probably. And he does this while holding down a full-time job as a blood spatter analyst, maintaining a social life, raising a child, and managing his cover identity. The show acknowledges the time pressure occasionally, but for the most part, Dexter seems to have an infinite number of hours in his day. The slice of life deserves its own mention. Dexter's boat is his escape, his disposal method, and his sanctuary. Named with characteristic dark humor, the boat was his means of accessing the deep water where he dumped his victims. But a boat requires maintenance, fuel, storage, and marina fees. It also creates records. Marina logs, fuel purchases, navigation data. In the era of modern surveillance, a man regularly taking his boat out at odd hours and returning without any fish would eventually attract attention. The show treats the slice of life as invisible to everyone except the few people who specifically look for it, which strains credibility but serves the story. And then there are the near misses, the moments when Dexter's carefully constructed world almost fell apart, and the often implausible ways he managed to hold it together. Doakes following him is the most sustained near miss in the series. For most of seasons 1 and 2, Doakes is on Dexter's tail. He follows him to crime scenes. He follows him to the marina. He confronts him in parking lots and break rooms. Doakes saw things that no one else at Miami Metro was paying attention to. The way Dexter looked at blood, the way he lingered at crime scenes longer than necessary, the way he seemed just a little too comfortable around death. Doakes couldn't name what he was seeing, not at first, but he could feel it. And he was right. Quinn's investigation in Season 5 is the franchise's biggest missed opportunity. Quinn hired Stan Liddy, a disgraced former cop, to follow Dexter and gather surveillance. Liddy got footage, he got photographs. He was building a case that could have ended everything. But Dexter killed Liddy in a confrontation on his boat, and Quinn, upon seeing blood on Dexter's shoe at the crime scene, chose to look the other way. Quinn's decision to drop the investigation was motivated by his relationship with Deb, by institutional loyalty, and by a reluctance to pull on a thread that might unravel his own world. But from a narrative standpoint, it's one of the most frustrating moments in the series. Quinn had the truth in his hands and let it go. The Season 6 cliffhanger is the near miss that finally became a direct hit. Deb walked into the church and saw Dexter mid-kill. There was no ambiguity, no misunderstanding, no way to explain it away. The show had spent 6 seasons building to this moment, 6 seasons of dramatic irony where the audience knew what Deb didn't. And when it finally happened, the impact was devastating. LaGuardia's investigation in Season 7 was the most professionally competent pursuit of Dexter in the entire franchise. She found physical evidence, she connected it to established cases, she identified Dexter's connection to Brian Moser, the ice truck killer. She built a case that, if presented to a prosecutor, would have been compelling. LaGuardia was doing exactly what a good detective should do, and the fact that she had to die for the show to continue is one of the franchise's most uncomfortable truths. Her death was narratively necessary, but morally unconscionable. New Blood's investigation through Angela Bishop was competent, but relied on some convenient leaps. Angela connected Dexter to the Bay Harbor Butcher through a conference speech by Batista, Molly Park's podcast research, and the discovery that local bodies had injection marks consistent with the Butcher's methods. The Googling criticism that Angela essentially solved a case that had stumped the FBI by doing internet research was widely discussed by fans and critics. It's a stretch, but it served the story. Resurrection took the investigation thread to its logical conclusion, with Batista finally acting on years of suspicion, only to be killed before he could share his findings. Batista's death means the truth is still buried, still waiting for someone to dig it up. Quinn's voicemail suggests he might be the next person to try. Every near miss in the franchise follows the same basic pattern. Someone gets close to the truth. Something intervenes, death, distraction, a choice to look away. And Dexter continues. The question is whether the intervention is the franchise protecting its protagonist, or whether it's saying something darker about the systems that are supposed to catch people like Dexter. Maybe the show's real argument is that institutions fail, that good people are silenced, that the truth doesn't matter if no one is willing to follow it all the way to the end. Now that we've covered the big mysteries and the near misses, let's spend some time on the characters and questions that don't get discussed enough. The deep cuts, the smaller mysteries that make this franchise so endlessly rewatchable. Camilla Fig is a character most casual viewers barely remember, but she's fascinating in context. She was Harry's close friend and colleague at Miami Metro. Original Sin confirmed that she knew about the shipping container massacre and Dexter's childhood trauma. In season 3 of the original series, Camilla was dying of lung cancer and asked Dexter to mercy kill her on her deathbed. He did, using a lethal injection disguised as a key lime pie. Fans have debated for years whether Camilla chose Dexter specifically because she knew what he was capable of. Did she know about the code? Did she suspect? The franchise has never confirmed or denied it, and that ambiguity makes her final request hauntingly open to interpretation. Tom Matthews is another character whose knowledge level is deliberately unclear. Harry's best friend and superior officer, Matthews knew about Harry's suicide and buried the autopsy report. He knew about Dexter and Brian's origins. He told Deb to keep certain things to herself. But how much did Matthews actually know? Did he know about the code? Did he suspect what Harry was training Dexter to do? The fact that Matthews never appeared in Original Sin, replaced by Aaron Spencer, leaves these questions unanswered. Matthews exists in a gray zone between ignorance and complicity, and the franchise seems content to leave him there. Vince Masuka worked alongside Dexter in the forensics lab for years. He identified that only one person at Miami Metro ever used blood slides at crime scenes, and that person was supposedly Dokes. But as a forensics expert himself, Masuka had every tool and every opportunity to notice inconsistencies. The dramatic irony of Masuka cheerfully joking around with the actual Bay Harbor butcher while analyzing evidence from the butcher's crimes is one of the show's darkest running jokes. Did he ever suspect? The show says no, but the audience is left wondering how that's possible. The broader Miami Metro question is one of the franchise's most entertaining running mysteries. How did an entire police department fail to catch a serial killer who literally worked in their forensics lab for over a decade? The answer, according to the show, is a combination of institutional blindness, personal relationships clouding professional judgment, and the simple fact that nobody wants to believe the quiet guy in the lab is killing people on the side. It's darkly funny and deeply unsettling at the same time. Now let's talk about Harrison, because his story is one of the franchise's most active mysteries, and it's getting more complicated with every new installment. Harrison Morgan's arc mirrors his father's in ways that are clearly intentional and deeply disturbing. Born in blood, just like Dexter. Found as an infant in a bathtub full of his mother's blood, placed there by the Trinity killer, as a deliberate echo of the shipping container massacre. Raised by a father who abandoned him, then reconnected with that father only to discover he was a serial killer. And now carrying his own darkness, his own violence, his own inability to fit into normal life. The Trinity razor is one of the most chilling details in New Blood. Dexter discovered that Harrison had been keeping a straight razor, similar to the one Arthur Mitchell used to murder Rita. Harrison found it comforting. He kept it hidden, the way Dexter kept his blood slides hidden. The parallel was unmistakable. The instruments of his mother's murder had become a source of psychological comfort for her son. That's the kind of detail that keeps psychologists up at night. Harrison's violence at school raised more questions than it answered. He attacked a classmate named Ethan, and the initial story was that Ethan was planning a school shooting and Harrison had intervened heroically. But Dexter's forensic analysis of the scene told a different story. The blood patterns, the angles, the injuries all suggested that Harrison was the aggressor, not the defender. Harrison might have provoked or initiated the attack and then constructed a heroic narrative around it. That's exactly the kind of manipulation Dexter himself has practiced his entire life. When Harrison and Dexter briefly partnered in New Blood, with Harrison helping to kill Kurt Caldwell, the franchise seemed to be setting up a passing of the torch, father and son killing together, the code extending to the next generation. But Harrison pulled back when Dexter broke the code by killing Officer Logan. Logan wasn't a killer. He hadn't escaped justice. He was a good man who was in the way, and Dexter killed him for purely practical reasons. That was Harrison's line. Harrison's claim in the New Blood finale, "I'm only like this because of you, not because I am like you," is the central question of his character going forward. Is Harrison's darkness a product of his environment, of watching his father kill, of growing up with the knowledge of what he is? Or is it something deeper, something inherited, something that was born in Rita's bathtub the same way Dexter's was born in the shipping container? Resurrection is exploring this question directly. Harrison is in New York, dealing with his father's survival, his own impulses, and the weight of everything he's seen and done. The trailers and early episodes suggest that Harrison's darkness isn't as resolved as he'd like to believe. The franchise is clearly invested in answering whether the cycle of violence can be broken or whether some damage, once inflicted on a child, perpetuates itself forever. The generational dimension of this franchise is one of its most underappreciated qualities. Laura Moser's blood, the shipping container, Dexter's creation, Harry's code, Rita's bathtub, Harrison's inheritance. Each generation carries the trauma forward, and each generation believes they can control it better than the last. Harry thought the code would contain Dexter. Dexter thought he could protect Harrison by leaving. Harrison thought he could end the cycle by pulling the trigger. None of them were fully right. Since we've covered Harrison, let's slide into some of the smaller mysteries that most fans walked right past, but that are genuinely interesting once you notice them. Professor Geller in the Season 6 twist is one of those things that's become more interesting with distance. The big reveal was that Geller, Travis Marshall's religious mentor who had been commanding him to create elaborate doomsday-themed crime scenes, was dead the entire time. Travis had been hallucinating him. He was talking to a corpse in a freezer, obeying commands from his own fractured psyche while believing he was following a living prophet. The twist was widely criticized because many viewers guessed it early. The clues were there. Nobody else ever interacted with Geller directly, and the show used editing tricks to keep him separate from other characters. But the twist becomes more interesting when you consider the parallels to Dexter himself. Dexter hallucinates Harry. Travis hallucinated Geller. Both men were following the instructions of a dead mentor who existed only in their minds. Both men had created an externalized authority figure to justify their actions. The Dark Passenger and Geller's ghostly commands serve the same psychological function. They allow the killer to feel that their actions are directed rather than chosen. If the Geller twist was meant to show that anyone can create their own Dark Passenger, then it's actually one of the thematically richest moments in the series. It just wasn't executed well enough for most viewers to appreciate that dimension. Isaac Serco in Season 7 is one of the franchise's most compelling one-season characters, and his story contains a mystery that the show never fully resolved. Isaac was a Ukrainian mob boss who came to Miami to avenge the death of his lover, Viktor Baskov, whom Dexter had killed. The reveal that Isaac's motivation was love, not business or revenge in the traditional sense, made him immediately more sympathetic than most Dexter antagonists. Isaac was cultured, intelligent, and genuinely dangerous. His conversations with Dexter had a quality that few other villain interactions achieved. a sense of mutual recognition between two men who operated outside normal moral boundaries. Isaac understood killing. He understood the loneliness of being fundamentally different from the people around you. His death, while narratively necessary, felt like the loss of a character who had more to offer. The question Isaac's story raises is whether there could have been a scenario where he and Dexter reached a truce, two killers, each driven by their own code, each recognizing something in the other. The show chose violence, as it usually does, but the possibility of a different outcome lingers. The Doomsday Tableau from Season 6 present a practical mystery that's entertaining to think about. Travis Marshall, acting alone and hallucinating guidance from the dead Geller, constructed massive, elaborate crime scenes based on the Book of Revelation. We're talking about large-scale installations involving multiple elements, significant engineering, and artistic vision. If Geller was dead the entire time, Travis did all of this solo, setting up the Angel Wings crime scene, the Horseman Tableau, the Whore of Babylon installation. Each one required planning, materials, transportation, and execution. For one person working alone, it's a staggering amount of work, and the show never really addresses how Travis managed it all without help. Lumen Pierce's fate after Season 5 is one of the franchise's most tantalizing loose ends. She left Miami after she and Dexter completed their revenge against the men who had tortured her. Her dark passenger faded. She was, as far as we know, free, but she also knew Dexter's secret. She knew he was a serial killer. She had killed alongside him. She's one of the few living people who could confirm the Bay Harbor butcher's real identity. Where is she? What's she doing? Has she told anyone? The franchise has never revisited her, and every time a new series is announced, fans wonder if Lumen will finally reappear. So far, nothing. Quinn buying a ring for Deb, only for her to turn him down, is one of those minor subplots that added genuine emotional texture to the series. Quinn is consistently one of the most underrated characters in the franchise. He's messy, he's morally flexible, he makes questionable choices, but he's also capable of real love and real sacrifice. His relationship with Deb was one of the few genuinely tender connections in a show dominated by darkness, and the fact that it didn't work out feels right for a world where loving anyone connected to Dexter Morgan is inherently dangerous. Masuka's daughter, introduced in Season 8, remains one of the most puzzling creative decisions in the series. The subplot went essentially nowhere. Masuka discovers he has an adult daughter from a previous relationship. They have some awkward getting-to-know-you scenes, and then the storyline fades into irrelevance as the season's main plots take over. It's widely considered one of the weakest arcs in the entire series, and its inclusion in the final season, when screen time was at a premium, remains inexplicable. Now let's move into the territory of the newer series, because Original Sin and Resurrection have added entirely new layers of mystery to the franchise. Original Sin was set in 1991 Miami and explored young Dexter's transition from a forensic intern to an active killer under Harry's guidance. Patrick Gibson played the younger version of Dexter, Christian Slater played Harry, and Molly Brown played Deb. Michael C. Hall returned for the iconic inner monologue voiceover, providing continuity with the original series. The prequel answered some genuinely long-standing questions. The confirmation that Brian and Dexter share the same biological father, Joe Driscoll, settled a debate that had been running since Season 1. The revelation of why Brian was separated from the Morgan family, his attempt to suffocate baby Deb, added tragic new context to Brian's eventual return as the ice truck killer. And Dexter's first canonical kill under the code, Nurse Mary, who was murdering patients at the hospital where Harry was being treated, established the moment when theory became practice. Aaron Spencer, played by Patrick Dempsey, served as the season's main villain, a Miami-Dade homicide captain who was secretly a child killer. The irony of a senior law enforcement official being the big bad mirrored the franchise's central theme, that the line between hunter and hunted is thinner than anyone wants to admit. The cancellation of Original Sin in August 2025 despite strong reviews and a fan petition with over 91,000 signatures, means that many promised mysteries will never be resolved on screen. The development of the blood slide ritual, whether Camilla truly knew about the code, how Matthew's and Harry's relationship evolved over the years, Lagerta's early suspicions about Harry's behavior, what happened in the years between Original Sin's timeline and Season 1. All of these threads were being set up for future seasons that will now never exist. It's a frustrating loss because Original Sin was doing something genuinely valuable for the franchise. It was adding depth and specificity to characters and events that the original series had sketched in broad strokes. The idea of watching Dexter become Dexter step by step, kill by kill, was compelling. And the cancellation feels less like a creative decision and more like a business one, which makes it sting a little more. Dexter Resurrection picked up where New Blood left off, and it brought with it a whole new set of mysteries that are actively unfolding. The premise itself is a mystery that had to be resolved immediately. Dexter survived Harrison's gunshot. He was resuscitated in an emergency room. The show handled this in its opening episodes, establishing that the bullet didn't hit anything fatal and that paramedics arrived in time. Some fans found this implausible, others accepted it as the franchise's way of correcting what it viewed as a premature ending. Either way, Dexter lives. Resurrection moved the setting to New York City, a significant change from the Miami and small-town environments of previous installments. Dexter traveled to New York to find Harrison, but he also found himself in a new web of danger. The show introduced Uma Thurman and Peter Dinklage to the main ensemble, adding star power and new character dynamics. Leon Prater emerged as the season's most distinctive antagonist. Prater's a serial killer collector, a man who doesn't just kill people but amasses trophies from history's most notorious killers. Think of him as a curator of death, someone who views serial killing as a kind of dark art and wants to possess the artifacts of that art. It's a concept the franchise hadn't explored before, and it added a meta-textual layer to the story. Prater doesn't just want to kill Dexter, he wants to own a piece of Dexter. He wants to add the Bay Harbor Butcher's legacy to his collection. Angel Batista's fate in Resurrection is one of the most emotionally devastating developments in the franchise's history. Angel had been a constant presence throughout the original series, a fundamentally decent man who served as Dexter's colleague and friend for over a decade. In Resurrection, Batista finally acted on years of buried suspicion. He began investigating Dexter, following leads that connected to the Bay Harbor Butcher case, and he traveled to New York. He was getting close, closer than he'd ever been. And then Prater killed him. Not Dexter, a different serial killer entirely. Angel Batista, one of the most beloved characters in the franchise, died pursuing the truth about his friend, and he died without ever getting to share what he'd found. The cruelty of that is remarkable. Batista deserved a better death. He deserved to know the truth and to decide what to do with it. Instead, he was eliminated by someone else's story. The New York Ripper is a major mystery introduced in Resurrection that's clearly being set up for future seasons. Detective Claudette, a new character in the Resurrection world, is obsessed with unmasking this serial killer who has been inactive for years. The Season 1 finale revealed the Ripper's identity as Don Frampt, a character viewers haven't met yet in any meaningful way. This is a deliberate setup for Season 2, a mystery that's been open but not closed, a loop that will keep viewers coming back. Quinn's voicemail adds another thread. While Dexter was trapped in Prater's chamber, he overheard Quinn leaving a voicemail for Batista, asking about his whereabouts and his investigation. Quinn was checking in. He was curious. And when Batista doesn't come home, when the investigation goes silent, Quinn is exactly the kind of character who might decide to follow up. The franchise has been teasing Quinn's potential role in exposing Dexter for years, going all the way back to Season 5 when he hired Liddy. Resurrection might finally be ready to pull that trigger. Harry's return as Dexter's spectral projection in Resurrection is significant. In the original series, Harry represented the code. In New Blood, Deb replaced Harry as the internal voice, representing guilt and confrontation. Now Harry is back, and the choice of which ghost guides Dexter is never arbitrary. Harry's return suggests that Dexter is cycling back to fundamentals, trying to find structure and rules again after the chaos of New Blood and the trauma of being shot by his own son. Whether Harry's presence is a comfort or a trap depends on your reading of the code itself. The big open questions heading into Season 2 are genuinely exciting. Will Quinn discover that Dexter is alive? Will the public finally learn the truth about the Bay Harbor Butcher? What is Don Frampt's connection to the larger story? Can Dexter and Harrison ever coexist, or are they destined to destroy each other? And perhaps most importantly, will this franchise ever commit to a definitive ending for its protagonist? The franchise keeps expanding. Old mysteries gain new meaning while fresh ones pile up. But as the night winds down, as we get deeper into the quiet hours, let's take a step back from the specific plot questions and talk about the biggest mystery of all, the one that sits at the center of everything. Is Dexter Morgan a good person? It's a simple question with no simple answer, and the franchise has spent nearly 20 years deliberately avoiding a definitive one. Here's the case for yes. Dexter kills murderers. He removes people who have escaped the justice system, people who would continue to kill if left unchecked. In a practical sense, his victims are people the system failed to stop. Every person Dexter kills is a person who won't kill again. The families of their future victims are spared. The streets are, in a concrete and measurable way, safer because Dexter exists. If you believe that the purpose of the justice system is to protect the innocent and that the system sometimes fails, then Dexter is doing what the system can't. He's filling a gap. Here's the case for no. Dexter doesn't kill because he wants to protect people. He kills because he needs to. The compulsion comes first. The moral justification comes second. The code gives him a framework for selecting targets, but the urge to kill exists independently of the code. If Dexter woke up tomorrow and the code disappeared, he wouldn't stop killing, he'd just stop being selective. The code is a containment strategy, not a moral philosophy. Dexter's a serial killer who happens to kill other serial killers, not a vigilante who happens to be a serial killer. The people around him are the strongest argument against the Dexter is good reading. Rita is dead because of him. Deb is dead because of him. Dokes was framed because of him. LaGuerta was killed because of him. Batista died investigating him. Harrison is psychologically damaged because of him. The trail of collateral damage Dexter leaves behind is staggering, and it includes some of the most decent, innocent people in the franchise. A truly good person would not leave that kind of wake. The code itself is worth examining. It was designed by a traumatized cop and a neuropsychiatrist as a way to manage an unmanageable situation. It wasn't created as a moral framework, it was created as a leash. Harry didn't teach Dexter right from wrong. He taught Dexter how to kill without getting caught, and he added a victim selection filter to minimize the damage. That's pragmatism, not ethics. Dexter's emotional growth throughout the series complicates the question further. In the pilot, he says, "I fake a lot of human interactions, but I feel like I fake them all." He describes himself as hollow, incapable of genuine emotion. But by season 4, he loves Rita and Harrison. His grief when Rita dies is real. By season 7, his love for Deb is the one thing he's certain about. In New Blood, he spent a decade suppressing his urges, building a life with Angela, trying to be normal. Was that growth genuine, or was he just getting better at mimicking human emotions? The first lines of the entire series are worth revisiting here. My name is Dexter, Dexter Morgan. I don't know what made me the way I am, but whatever it was left a hollow place inside. People fake a lot of human interactions, but I feel like I fake them all, and I fake them very well. And that's my burden, I guess. But I don't blame my foster parents for that. Harry and Doris Morgan did a wonderful job raising me, but they're both dead now. I didn't kill them. Honest. Compare that to Dexter in New Blood, genuinely wanting a normal life, genuinely caring about Angela, genuinely heartbroken when he realizes he can't have what he wants. Something changed over those years, whether it was real emotional development or simply more sophisticated mimicry, is one of those questions the franchise refuses to answer definitively. The show's thesis, if it has one, seems to be that Dexter is neither good nor evil. He's broken. He was broken in a shipping container at 2 years old, and everything that followed was an attempt to function within that brokenness. The code didn't fix him. It gave him structure. The relationships he formed didn't heal him. They gave him reasons to maintain his cover. The Dark Passenger isn't an excuse. It's a name he gave to the parts of himself he couldn't accept. Whether that makes him admirable or monstrous depends entirely on how you weigh the lives he saved against the lives he took, and the lives he destroyed just by being who he is. It's the kind of question that doesn't have a clean answer. And maybe that's exactly why we're still talking about Dexter Morgan, still watching, still wondering all these years later. The show works because it refuses to let you settle into a comfortable position. Every time you think Dexter is a hero, he does something that reminds you he's a monster. Every time you think he's irredeemable, he shows a flash of genuine humanity that makes you question your judgment. That tension, that constant oscillation between empathy and revulsion is the engine that has powered the franchise for nearly 2 decades. And it shows no signs of stopping. The mysteries of Dexter Morgan are not the kind that get solved. They're the kind that deepen with every rewatch, every new series, every conversation with another fan. The shipping container, the code, the dark passenger, the blood slides, the people who died for knowing the truth. The question of whether any of it meant anything or whether Dexter was just a broken man doing what broken men do. There are more mysteries to explore. Resurrection Season 2 is coming. The Trinity Killer prequel is in development. The franchise is still alive, still expanding, still asking questions it has no intention of fully answering. And honestly, I think that's the right approach. A Dexter who is fully explained is a Dexter who is no longer interesting. The mystery is the point. Tonight we covered a lot of ground. We started in a shipping container and worked our way through brothers, fathers, codes, killers, lovers, investigations, betrayals, endings, and beginnings. We talked about the people who knew the truth and paid for it. We talked about the nature of the dark passenger and whether it's even real. We talked about the endings that didn't work and the ones that are still being written. We talked about Harrison and whether the cycle can be broken. And we asked the biggest question of all, a question that the franchise itself seems to believe doesn't have an answer. If you're still awake at this point, I appreciate you sticking around for the whole journey. If you fell asleep somewhere around the Bay Harbor Butcher section, that's completely fine. That is, after all, exactly what this video is for. I'll be doing more of these deep dive sleep videos in the future. If you'd like to catch the next one, subscribing is the easiest way to make sure you don't miss it. And if you have a topic you'd love to hear covered in this format, drop a comment. I read all of them, and some of my best video ideas have come directly from viewer suggestions. For now, though, that's where we'll leave it for tonight. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I hope this helped you relax, maybe learn something new, and drift off feeling satisfied. Stay safe, sleep well, and sweet dreams. Even if they involve a little bit of Miami, some plastic wrap, and a boat heading out to sea. Good night. Actually, before we wind all the way down, there are a few more mysteries that I really want to spend some time on tonight, because I think some of the richest material in this franchise lives in the spaces between the big moments, the quiet questions, the implications that don't announce themselves but sit there waiting for you on your second or third rewatch. Let's go back to the Trinity Killer for a moment, because there's something about Arthur Mitchell's family that I find endlessly fascinating, and it connects to one of the franchise's deepest themes. Arthur's wife Sally knew, she had to have known, not that her husband was a serial killer necessarily, but that something was profoundly wrong. She lived with a man who controlled every aspect of their household, a man whose moods could shift from warm and charming to violent and terrifying in the space of a breath. She managed those moods, she protected the children as best she could, she maintained the facade of a normal family because the alternative was unthinkable. Sally Mitchell is one of the franchise's most tragic, unnamed mysteries. What did she tell herself to get through each day? What did she see and choose not to see? When Arthur went on his business trips, the trips that coincided with his killing cycles, did she ever wonder? Did she ever look at the news reports from distant cities and feel something cold in her stomach? The show doesn't answer these questions, and it doesn't need to. Sally's silence, her careful management of a dangerous man, her willingness to maintain appearances at any cost, all of it speaks for itself. She is a mirror for every person in the franchise who looked at Dexter Morgan and chose not to see what was right in front of them. The difference is that Sally's monster came home every night and sat at the dinner table. Jonah Mitchell's fate is another thread that the franchise picked up and then set down. In Season 6, Dexter learned that Sally had been bludgeoned and Rebecca had been killed in a bathtub. Jonah was the prime suspect, and Dexter traveled to Nebraska to investigate, briefly partnering with Ghost Brian in one of the series' most tonally unusual episodes. The truth turned out to be messier than a simple copycat scenario. Sally had actually killed Rebecca, and Jonah had killed Sally in a rage. The cycle of violence that Arthur created continued even after his death, rippling through his family like an aftershock. But what happened to Jonah after that? The show moved on. Dexter returned to Miami. Jonah was left behind, alive but broken, carrying the weight of his father's legacy and his own violence. He's one of the franchise's most abandoned characters, a young man whose entire life was shaped by a monster and who never got anything resembling closure. Speaking of abandoned storylines, let's talk about Louis Green, because his arc in Season 7 is one of the show's most frustrating creative dead ends. Louis was introduced as Masuka's intern, a tech-savvy young man who developed an obsessive interest in Dexter. He stole the prosthetic hand from the ice truck killer case. He created a video game based on serial killers. He hacked into Dexter's credit cards and was clearly being positioned as a significant threat. The build-up suggested someone who had figured out Dexter's secret and was going to use technology and cunning to expose or blackmail him. Then George Novikov, the Koshka Brotherhood manager, shot Louis on Dexter's boat, and the storyline evaporated. Louis went from a promising antagonist to a corpse in the span of a couple episodes, and none of the questions his character raised were ever answered. Did he know Dexter was a killer? What was he planning to do with the prosthetic hand? What was the endgame of his digital harassment? The show discarded him so abruptly that it felt like a draft of a different season had been started and then abandoned mid-write. The Koshka Brotherhood itself, Isaac Serko's organization, is another element that deserved more exploration. The Ukrainian mob's presence in Miami, their connection to the strip club called the Foxhole, their involvement in sex trafficking and organized crime, all of it provided a backdrop that could have supported an entire season's worth of storytelling. Instead, the Brotherhood was mostly used as a vehicle for Isaac's personal vendetta against Dexter, and once Isaac was gone, the organization faded into irrelevance. George Novikov was killed by Quinn, Nadia fled, and the larger criminal enterprise that had been established as a major power in Miami simply ceased to matter. Let me shift to something that fascinates me about the franchise's treatment of psychology and forensic science, because the show occupies a really interesting position between credibility and fantasy. Dexter works as a blood spatter analyst for Miami Metro. His job is to examine crime scenes and determine what happened based on the patterns blood leaves on surfaces. This is a real forensic discipline, and the show initially took it fairly seriously. Early seasons showed Dexter doing actual analysis, using luminol, measuring spatter patterns, calculating angles of impact. His expertise was presented as genuine, and his insights at crime scenes often drove the investigation forward. But there's a contradiction at the heart of this premise. Dexter is a forensic analyst by day and a serial killer by night. He uses the same skills in both roles. He knows how blood behaves because he creates blood patterns as well as analyzing them. He knows how to manipulate crime scenes because he's an expert at reading them. The knowledge that makes him good at his day job also makes him good at his night job, and the show treats this as a feature rather than a bug. The problem is that this should work in reverse too. A forensic analyst who is also a serial killer would inevitably contaminate his own work. He would have biases, blind spots, personal interests in steering investigations away from himself. And yet Miami Metro never questions the objectivity of their analyst, even as he works cases that sometimes intersect with his own activities. In Season 2, Dexter was assigned to the Bay Harbor butcher case, meaning he was literally investigating himself. The absurdity of that situation is played for dramatic irony, and it works narratively, but the practical reality is that any competent police department would have recognized the conflict of interest. The M99 tranquilizer that Dexter used for most of the original series raises its own set of questions. M99, also known as etorphine, is a synthetic opioid that is roughly 1,000 times more potent than morphine. It's used exclusively in veterinary medicine for sedating large animals. It's not something you can buy at a pharmacy. It's not something a forensic analyst would have legitimate access to. Dexter obtained it by stealing from the Miami Metro evidence room, which is theoretically possible, but would require falsifying inventory records repeatedly over many years, without anyone noticing a pattern of missing tranquilizers. New Blood changed the tranquilizer to ketamine, which was more readily available, but created its own plot issues. Angela Bishop's investigation connected Dexter to the Bay Harbor butcher, partly through ketamine injection marks found on local bodies, which matched the butcher's supposed method. The problem is that the original Bay Harbor butcher victim showed M99, not ketamine. The switch was either a retcon, a mistake, or a deliberate choice that the show never adequately explained. Fans have debated this exhaustively, and the consensus seems to be that it was a practical decision by the writers who didn't want to deal with the logistics of M99 acquisition in a small town, at the cost of consistency with the established canon. The broader forensic science question is worth lingering on. In the real world, blood spatter analysis has been subject to significant scientific scrutiny in recent years. Some researchers have questioned the reliability of bloodstain pattern analysis as a forensic tool, arguing that the interpretations are more subjective than the confident testimony of expert witnesses would suggest. The show presents Dexter's analyses as essentially infallible, which is dramatically satisfying but scientifically questionable. This matters because the show's credibility rests partly on the idea that Dexter is genuinely expert at what he does, both officially and unofficially. If blood spatter analysis is less reliable than the show presents, then some of Dexter's professional conclusions might be wrong, and if his professional conclusions are sometimes wrong, what about his personal ones? What about his assessments of his victim's guilt? The code requires Dexter to verify that his targets are genuine killers who have escaped justice. But Dexter's verification process isn't a trial. It's one man's investigation, conducted in secret, interpreted through the lens of his own compulsions. How many of Dexter's victims were truly guilty beyond a reasonable doubt? And how many might have been convicted on evidence that a critical eye would have questioned? The show never goes there, and I understand why. Questioning Dexter's accuracy would undermine the moral foundation that makes the character watchable. If Dexter might be killing innocent people, the audience can't root for him at all. But the question exists, hovering at the edges of the narrative, waiting for anyone willing to look at it closely enough. Let me also spend a moment on the show's geography, because Miami itself is a character in the franchise, and the way the show uses it raises some interesting questions. Dexter's Miami is simultaneously realistic and fantastical. The show was actually filmed largely in Long Beach, California, with establishing shots and second unit work done in Miami. This creates a visual texture that feels authentically tropical without always being geographically accurate. Real Miami locations like the Port of Miami, Bayfront Park, and various waterfront areas appear throughout the series, grounding the show in a specific place. But the show's Miami is also notably smaller than the real thing. Dexter seems able to get anywhere in the city within minutes. His commute from his apartment to the station, from the station to a crime scene, from a crime scene to a kill location, all of these transitions happen with a fluidity that real Miami traffic would never allow. Anyone who has actually driven in Miami during rush hour knows that getting from Coconut Grove to Miami Beach can take an hour. Dexter seems to exist in a Miami without traffic, without parking problems, without the basic logistical friction that defines life in a major city. This is obviously a dramatic convenience, and every television show set in a real city does it. But it's worth noting because Dexter's ability to lead a double life depends partly on the show's compressed geography. If Dexter had to account for real commute times, real traffic patterns, and real distances between locations, his schedule would be physically impossible. The show's Miami is a slightly magical place where driving time bends to accommodate the narrative, and that's fine. But it's one of those things you can't unsee once you notice it. The climate of Miami also plays into the show's greatest unaddressed practical question. Dexter wraps his victims in plastic, dismembers them, bags the pieces, and transports them in his car to the marina. In Miami, where the average temperature hovers around 85 degrees for most of the year, with humidity that rarely drops below 70%. The idea of transporting dismembered human remains in the trunk of a car through subtropical heat, without anyone noticing the smell is, to put it gently, optimistic. Dexter's car, his apartment, his boat, all of these spaces would carry forensic evidence. Hair, blood, fibers, DNA. Even with his professional cleaning skills, the sheer volume of killing and transporting he does over the course of the series would leave trace evidence in quantities that no amount of bleach could fully eliminate. A single traffic stop, a single fender bender, a single curious neighbor borrowing his car, any of these mundane events could have exposed him. The show acknowledges this risk occasionally, but for the most part, Dexter's vehicles and living spaces exist in a state of forensic purity that real-world investigators would find laughable. None of this makes the show bad. These are the kinds of concessions that serialized storytelling makes in order to function. A show that depicted every logistical challenge of serial killing in realistic detail would be unwatchable. A procedural nightmare of bleach purchases, traffic delays, and evidence disposal anxiety. Dexter works because it abstracts the practical details enough to focus on the psychological and moral questions that actually make the story interesting. But the practical questions are fun to think about, especially at this hour of the night, when your brain is in that comfortable space between analysis and dreaming where everything seems worth examining and nothing seems too trivial to consider. Let me circle back to one more thing before we truly wind down, because it's a mystery that spans the entire franchise, and I think it deserves its own moment. The Code of Harry has 2 rules. Don't get caught, only kill people who deserve it. But there's a third unspoken rule that Harry taught Dexter through example and through the years of training. Fake being normal. Blend in. Learn to mimic emotions. Learn to say the right things at the right times. Learn to be liked. Dexter's social performance is one of the franchise's most fascinating ongoing mysteries. How much of Dexter's personality is real and how much is fabricated? In the early seasons, the answer seems clear. Almost everything is fake. His relationship with Rita starts as cover. His friendships at work are tactical. His charm is manufactured. Even his love for Deb is framed as an approximation of genuine feeling rather than the real thing. But as the series progresses, the line between performance and reality blurs. Dexter's grief over Rita's death seems genuine. His protectiveness of Harrison goes beyond what's required by his cover. His willingness to risk everything for Deb in later seasons suggests emotions that have outgrown their origins as camouflage. By the time we reach New Blood, Dexter has spent a decade living as Jim Lindsay, building a life with Angela, forming friendships, coaching a wrestling team. Was all of that fake? Was he performing normalcy for 10 years with no audience to perform for? The possibility that Dexter's emotions became real over time, that the mask fused with the face, is one of the most psychologically interesting things the show has to offer. It suggests that the capacity for genuine feeling isn't something you're born with or without. It's something that can be developed through practice, through repetition, through the simple act of pretending until pretending becomes being. Or maybe not. Maybe Dexter's apparent emotional growth is just more sophisticated mimicry. Maybe he's gotten so good at faking it that even he can't tell the difference anymore. That possibility is equally interesting and equally troubling. The franchise's refusal to resolve this ambiguity is, I think, its greatest creative achievement. Other shows about anti-heroes eventually reveal whether their protagonist has a genuine heart or a calculating void. Breaking Bad showed us Walter White's true nature in its final season. The Sopranos explored Tony's capacity for change through years of therapy before concluding that some people simply don't change. But Dexter refuses to commit. Every moment of apparent growth is followed by a moment of apparent regression. Every act of love is contaminated by an act of violence. The show holds both possibilities in tension and asks the audience to decide for themselves. Which brings us finally truly to the end of tonight's journey. We started in a shipping container in the port of Miami, where 2 toddlers sat in their mother's blood for 2 days. We followed the thread from that original trauma through Brian's return, Harry's secrets, the Bay Harbor butcher case, the Trinity killer's devastating impact, Deb's tragic arc, the parade of people who discovered the truth and paid for it, the nature of the dark passenger, the controversial endings, the rituals and logistics of Dexter's double life, the near misses, the deep cuts, the prequel revelations, the resurrection mysteries, and the ultimate question of whether Dexter Morgan is good, evil, or something the English language doesn't have a word for. That's a lot of ground. And the fact that we can spend this long talking about a single fictional character and still have more to say tells you something about the depth of what this franchise has built. Dexter isn't just a show about a serial killer. It's a show about identity, about trauma, about the stories we tell ourselves to survive, about the people we hurt when we can't stop being who we are. The mysteries we covered tonight aren't going away. Resurrection Season 2 is coming. The Trinity Killer prequel is in development. 3 total seasons of Resurrection have been planned. The franchise is still asking questions, still adding layers, still refusing to provide the kind of clean answers that would let us neatly file Dexter Morgan away in a category and move on. And I think that's exactly right, because the best mysteries aren't the ones that get solved. They're the ones that get deeper every time you look at them. Dexter Morgan is that kind of mystery. If you're still with me, thank you. Truly, if you drifted off somewhere around the dark passenger section or the original ending discussion, that's wonderful too. That's what we're here for. I'll be back with more of these deep dive sleep videos soon. If you want to hear about a specific topic, a specific show, a specific corner of pop culture that you think deserves this treatment, leave a comment. I read them all. Until next time, wherever you are tonight, I hope this was a comfortable way to spend a few hours. Stay safe, sleep well, and sweet dreams, even if they're a little darker than usual. Good night. Wait. Actually, I realize we rushed past a few things that really deserve more attention. If you're still awake, let me go a little deeper on some topics that I think are genuinely underexplored in the fandom. Consider this the bonus round for the Night Owls. Let's talk about the women of Dexter, because the franchise's treatment of its female characters is one of its most interesting and most debated aspects, and it connects to several unresolved mysteries. Rita Bennett was, for 4 seasons, the heart of Dexter's civilian life. She was kind, damaged in her own way from her abusive first marriage to Paul, and desperately trying to build a normal life for herself and her children. Rita believed in Dexter. She trusted him completely. She married him. She had his child. And she never once suspected what he truly was. The mystery of Rita is whether that blindness was believable. Could a woman who lived with a man, shared a bed with him, raised children with him, truly not notice that he was a serial killer? The show argues yes, and it makes its case through Rita's own trauma. She had been married to an abusive addict before Dexter. Her frame of reference for male behavior was already skewed. Dexter's emotional distance, his late nights, his occasional strange behavior, all of these could be explained within the context she already understood. He wasn't abusive, he wasn't on drugs, he came home, he was good with the kids. By Rita's standards, Dexter was a good husband. The bar had been set that low by Paul. But there's a darker reading. Rita was Dexter's ultimate cover. He chose her, at least initially, precisely because she was damaged enough not to look too closely. Her vulnerability made her safe. Her gratitude for having a good partner made her uncurious. Dexter acknowledges this in early seasons, describing Rita as part of his disguise, a relationship that makes him look normal. The fact that he eventually developed genuine feelings for her doesn't erase the cynicism of how the relationship started. Rita's death in the season 4 finale isn't just devastating because she was innocent. It's devastating because she never knew who she was married to. She died believing her husband was a good man who loved her. The irony is bottomless, and the franchise never lets you forget it, because Harrison's entire existence is a monument to Rita's murder, and every time we see Harrison struggling with darkness, we're reminded of the woman who died without understanding why. Hannah McKay presents a completely different dynamic, and her unresolved fate is one of the franchise's most persistent loose ends. Hannah was a poisoner. She killed her first victim as a teenager, working alongside her boyfriend Wayne Randall on a multi-state killing spree. She later killed her abusive husband and possibly others. When she and Dexter fell for each other in season 7, it was the first time Dexter had a partner who truly understood him, because she was fundamentally the same kind of person. Their relationship worked in a way that none of Dexter's other romantic connections ever did. With Rita, he was performing normalcy. With Lila, he was being manipulated. With Lumen, he was sharing a temporary mission. But with Hannah, there was genuine recognition. Neither of them had to pretend. Neither of them was shocked by the other's nature. They could sit across a dinner table and talk about killing the way other couples talk about their jobs. Hannah fled to Argentina with Harrison at the end of season 8 after Dexter's faked death. The show implied that she would raise Harrison as her own, giving him the kind of unconventional but loving home that two former killers might create. But the franchise has been remarkably silent about Hannah since then. She wasn't mentioned in New Blood. Her status in Resurrection is unclear. She's out there somewhere, alive as far as we know, possessing knowledge of Dexter's true identity, and presumably raising or having raised his son for a significant portion of his childhood. The fact that the franchise hasn't addressed Hannah in the revival series is either a deliberate creative choice or an oversight, and either interpretation is interesting. If it's deliberate, it might be because the writers consider Hannah's story complete, a character who found her version of peace and doesn't need to be dragged back into the chaos. If it's an oversight, it's a significant one, because Hannah is one of the few people who could blow Dexter's cover at any time. Lila Tournay is another character whose presence in the franchise raises questions that were never fully answered. Lila was introduced as Dexter's sponsor in N.A., a British artist with a ghoulish aesthetic and a dangerously obsessive personality. She recognized something dark in Dexter and was attracted to it. She killed Dokes to protect Dexter, not out of any moral calculation, but because she wanted to remove an obstacle to their relationship. She then tried to kill Dexter, Aster, and Cody by setting her loft on fire when Dexter broke up with her. Lila's psychology is fascinating because she's arguably the first character in the series who sees Dexter clearly and isn't repelled. She's drawn to his darkness. She finds it exciting, even beautiful. In a different story, Lila might have been Dexter's perfect partner, someone who understood and accepted him completely. Instead, she was too unstable, too possessive, and too willing to hurt innocent people. Dexter killed her in Paris, and the show moved on. But Lila's existence poses a question the franchise has never fully engaged with. If Dexter is a monster, what does it say about the people who are attracted to his monstrousness? And are they drawn to the darkness itself, or to the honesty of someone who doesn't pretend to be something he's not? Let me also take a moment to talk about the music of the Dexter franchise, because it's one of those elements that contributes enormously to the show's atmosphere and connects to the broader mystery of how the show makes you feel about its protagonist. Daniel Licht composed the original score across the original series, New Blood, and associated projects. His work was distinctive, mixing Latin-influenced rhythms with eerie, ambient textures that created a sound world that was simultaneously warm and unsettling. The Miami heat was in the music, the danger was in the music, and the strange, melancholy loneliness of Dexter's existence was in the music. Licht's score did something remarkable. It made you feel sympathy for a serial killer without ever letting you forget that you were sympathizing with a serial killer. The music held both truths at once. The main title theme, composed by Rolf Kent, became iconic. It's a macabre piece that plays over a title sequence showing Dexter's morning routine, preparing breakfast, getting dressed, tying his shoes, all rendered as slightly sinister through close-up cinematography and the music's unsettling cheerfulness. The sequence is a masterclass in establishing tone. Everything Dexter does is normal. Everything Dexter does is suspicious. The two readings coexist in every frame, and the music is the bridge between them. Following Licht's passing, Pat Irwin took over composing duties for Resurrection. The transition in scoring personnel is one of those behind-the-scenes changes that casual viewers might not notice consciously, but that affects the emotional texture of the show. Music is one of the primary tools through which a series tells you how to feel about what you're watching, and a change in composer inevitably shifts that emotional guidance in subtle ways. Let's also spend a moment on the franchise's relationship with its audience, because the Dexter fandom is one of the most engaged and opinionated communities in television, and their relationship with the show is itself a kind of mystery. Dexter asks its audience to root for a serial killer. That's the fundamental pact. You watch this show, you invest in this character, and in doing so, you participate in a moral exercise that most entertainment avoids. Every time Dexter kills someone who deserves it, you feel satisfaction. Every time he nearly gets caught, you feel anxiety on his behalf. Every time an innocent person is hurt because of his actions, you feel the cognitive dissonance of wanting the protagonist to succeed, while knowing that his success comes at a terrible cost. The audience's response to the various endings reveals something interesting about this dynamic. When the lumberjack ending left Dexter alive and unpunished, fans were furious. When New Blood seemingly killed Dexter, fans were divided. When Resurrection brought him back, fans were mostly pleased. The pattern suggests that audiences don't actually want Dexter to face consequences, despite claiming they want a satisfying ending. What they want is continued access to the character. They want to keep watching. They want the moral exercise to continue indefinitely, because the exercise itself is the point. This might be the franchise's deepest mystery. Not anything within the story, but the story's effect on the people who watch it. What does it mean that millions of people spend hundreds of hours emotionally invested in a serial killer's survival and happiness? What does it say about the human capacity for empathy that we can feel genuine grief when Rita dies, genuine anger when Deb is forced to kill Lagerta, and genuine satisfaction when Dexter dispatches a child murderer, all within the same fictional framework? The show doesn't judge its audience for this. It understands that the appeal of Dexter isn't about endorsing murder. It's about the fantasy of control, of purpose, of being able to identify the bad people and remove them from the world. In a reality where justice is often slow, imperfect, and unevenly distributed, the idea of someone who can see through the lies and take definitive action is deeply appealing. The code transforms murder into something that feels like service, and the audience's willingness to accept that transformation, to ride along with it for season after season, says something about the gap between the justice we have and the justice we wish we had. I find this genuinely fascinating to think about. Not in a judgmental way, in a curious way. The same way you might wonder why roller coasters exist, or why people watch horror movies, or why anyone voluntarily reads true crime before bed. We're drawn to darkness in controlled doses. We use fiction to explore the parts of ourselves and the world that we can't safely explore in reality. Dexter is one of the most successful controlled doses of darkness ever created, and its longevity is proof that the dose still works. All right, now I really am winding down. I promised a gentle landing, and I intend to deliver one. The Dexter franchise, as it stands today, is an ongoing project. It has been running in one form or another for nearly 20 years. It has survived bad seasons, controversial endings, network changes, cast departures, and the kind of creative exhaustion that kills most long-running properties. And it keeps going. Resurrection Season 2 is ordered. The Trinity Killer prequel is in development. 3 seasons of Resurrection have been mapped out. Dexter Morgan, the character, has survived the shipping container, the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, the Trinity Killer, his sister's death, his own fake death, his son's gunshot, and the collapse of every meaningful relationship he's ever had. The character endures the way the franchise endures, through sheer refusal to stop. Whether that's admirable or exhausting depends on your relationship with the material. For me tonight, sitting here talking about it with you, it feels like a gift. There's always more to discuss, always another angle, always another mystery that you hadn't considered until someone mentioned it at exactly the right time. The mysteries of Dexter Morgan are the kind that reward patience. They don't announce themselves with dramatic music and flashing lights. They sit quietly in the background, waiting for you to notice them. The real Rudy Cooper who died so Brian could steal his identity. The bloodslide that rolled under a church pew and started an investigation. The voicemail Quinn left for a dead man. The straight razor Harrison kept in his bag. The question Dexter asked himself in a shipping container when he was too young to form the words. These are the things that make a story worth returning to. These are the things that make a character worth spending 3 hours with on a quiet night. And these are the things I hope found their way into your dreams tonight, if you've already drifted off, or that will be waiting for you when you close your eyes, if you're still here listening. Thank you for spending this time with me. Every single view, every listen, every comment, every subscription, it all means more than you know. This channel exists because people like you show up and stay, and I never take that for granted. I'll see you next time. Same format, different universe, same cozy energy. Until then, stay safe, stay curious, and sweet dreams. Good night. You know what? There's one more stretch of material I want to cover because every time I think I'm done with this topic, another thread presents itself. And since we're here and the night is still going, let's pull on a few more. Let's talk about Dexter's relationship with children, because it's one of the franchise's most quietly unsettling themes, and it connects to several mysteries we haven't fully addressed. Dexter is, on paper, a terrible candidate for fatherhood. He's a serial killer with self-diagnosed sociopathic tendencies who admits to faking most human emotions. And yet, the franchise repeatedly shows him being genuinely good with kids. He was gentle and patient with Aster and Cody, Rita's children from her first marriage. He was protective of Harrison from the moment of his birth. Even his interactions with other children throughout the series suggest a capacity for care that contradicts his claim of emotional emptiness. The mystery here isn't just whether Dexter loves his children, it's whether his version of love is real or a more sophisticated version of the performance he puts on for everyone else. When Dexter holds baby Harrison, is he feeling what a normal father feels? Or is he experiencing a version of possessiveness and duty that mimics fatherly love well enough to pass? The show suggests both at different times without resolving the tension. His decision to abandon Harrison is one of the franchise's most debated choices. After faking his death in the Season 8 finale, Dexter sent Harrison to Argentina with Hannah, believing the boy would be safer without him. On one level, this is an act of love. Dexter recognized that his presence was a danger to his child and removed himself from the equation. On another level, it's an act of cowardice. He chose exile over the hard work of being a parent, and he left his infant son with a woman who was, by any reasonable measure, a serial poisoner. Harrison's resentment in New Blood was entirely justified. He grew up believing his father was dead, only to discover that Dexter had chosen to leave. That betrayal, the knowledge that your father could have been there but decided not to be, is a different kind of trauma from losing a parent to death. It's a wound that comes with the additional sting of knowing it was deliberate. Dexter's parenting in New Blood was a crash course in everything he'd missed and everything he couldn't fix. He tried to connect with Harrison, to understand him, to help him navigate the same darkness that Dexter himself had carried for decades. But Dexter's version of parenting was filtered through the code. When he saw Harrison's violent tendencies, his instinct wasn't to get the kid therapy. It was to assess whether Harrison had a dark passenger, and if so, to teach him how to manage it. He was replicating Harry's approach. Don't treat the condition, channel it. The cycle repeating. Is there any scenario where Dexter could have been a good father? I don't think so, and I don't think the franchise thinks so either. But the question itself is important because it's connected to the larger question of whether anyone who carries this kind of damage can avoid passing it on. Harry passed his trauma management approach to Dexter. Dexter passed his absence and his violence to Harrison. Harrison may one day pass something to his own children if the franchise continues long enough to explore that. The chain doesn't break because someone wants it to. It breaks only if someone finds a fundamentally different way to deal with the darkness, and nobody in the franchise has managed that yet. Let's also spend a moment on a mystery that's been nagging at me throughout this entire recording. The question of Dexter's intelligence, and specifically whether the show's depiction of his genius is consistent. Dexter is presented as exceptionally smart. He's a skilled forensic analyst. He's a meticulous planner. He outsmarts police investigations, FBI task forces, and fellow serial killers. His ability to think several steps ahead is central to his survival. But the franchise also shows Dexter making mistakes that a genuinely brilliant person probably wouldn't make. Keeping the blood slides is the most obvious example. A genius-level serial killer who works in forensics would understand that trophies are the single most common piece of evidence used to catch serial killers. It's covered in basic criminal profiling courses, which Dexter would certainly know about. And yet he can't stop collecting them. The slides are a compulsion that overrides his intelligence, and the show acknowledges this explicitly. Dexter knows they're dangerous. He keeps them anyway. The addiction is stronger than the logic, but there are other moments of apparent stupidity that are harder to explain. Dropping a blood slide at a crime scene in Season 7 is arguably the most damaging mistake of Dexter's career, and it's the kind of careless error that seems inconsistent with a character who has been meticulously cleaning up after himself for over a decade. It's the plot equivalent of a master chess player leaving their queen undefended. It can happen, but it strains credibility. The Season 6 church incident is another example. Dexter was killing Travis Marshall in a public building, a church, with unlocked doors in the middle of the day. Deb walked in because the door was open. A killer who has successfully evaded detection for years would, at minimum, lock the door. This is basic operational security. The show needed Deb to discover Dexter's secret at this point in the narrative, so it manufactured a scenario where Dexter was uncharacteristically careless. The plot demanded it, but the character didn't support it. New Blood had a similar issue. Dexter, living under an alias in a small town where everyone knows everyone, began killing again after a decade of abstinence. Within a matter of weeks, he had accumulated enough suspicious behavior to draw the attention of the local police chief, his own girlfriend. A man who successfully hid his nature from an entire metropolitan police department for over 10 years was undone by a small-town police chief doing basic investigative work. The change in setting was supposed to increase the danger, but it also exposed a character who should have been better at this than the show allowed him to be. The explanation, I think, is that Dexter's intelligence is genuine but compartmentalized. He's brilliant at the mechanics of killing, the forensics, the planning, the disposal. But he's significantly less brilliant at managing the emotional and relational aspects of his double life. His mistakes almost always occur at the intersection of his killing life and his personal life, when the two worlds collide in ways he hasn't prepared for. The blood slide at the church fell because Dexter was emotionally agitated after the confrontation with Travis. The unlocked door happened because Dexter was focused on the kill, not on the environment. His exposure in Iron Lake happened because he was emotionally compromised by Harrison's arrival. In other words, Dexter's genius has a blind spot, and that blind spot is his own humanity. The more human he becomes, the more mistakes he makes. The emotionless killer of the early seasons was nearly flawless in his execution. The increasingly emotional Dexter of later seasons got progressively sloppier. There's something poetic about that. The thing that makes Dexter more human is also the thing that makes him less effective as a killer. His growth as a person is inversely correlated with his competence as a predator. And maybe that's the franchise's final, deepest mystery. Not whether Dexter is good or evil, but whether becoming more human is itself a kind of self-destruction for someone like him. Harry's code was designed for a machine. It assumed a Dexter who felt nothing, who could execute kills with clinical precision and walk away without emotional residue. The code was never designed for a Dexter who loves, who grieves, who makes decisions based on feeling rather than logic. And the further Dexter drifts from the machine Harry built, the more the code fails him. Every mistake Dexter has made in the franchise, from the blood slides to the unlocked church to the small town exposure, can be traced back to the same root cause. He's becoming a person, and persons are messy, imperfect, emotional, and fundamentally incapable of the kind of controlled perfection that serial killing requires. The shipping container broke Dexter. Harry's code rebuilt him as a weapon. But the weapon keeps trying to become human. And every time it gets a little closer to succeeding, the weapon becomes a little less effective. That tension between the monster and the man, between the code and the heart, is what has fueled 20 years of storytelling. And it shows no signs of being resolved. Not tonight anyway. Tonight we let it rest. We let the questions sit where they are, unanswered and comfortable in their ambiguity. We spent a long time together, and if you've been with me for all of it, I hope you found something here that was worth the hours. A new perspective on a scene you've watched a dozen times, a question you hadn't considered before, a connection between two moments that suddenly makes both of them richer. That's what this is about. Not answers. Connections. The joy of pulling one thread and watching the entire tapestry shift. The satisfaction of understanding something a little better, even when the understanding is that some things can't be fully understood. The night is getting quiet. Wherever you are, whatever space you're in, I hope it feels safe and warm. I hope the darkness outside your window is the comfortable kind, the kind that invites sleep rather than fear. And I hope that when you close your eyes, if you haven't already, the last thing you feel is a sense of completion. We covered a lot tonight. We earned this rest. Sweet dreams. I'll see you next time. One last thought, and then I truly am done. There is a moment in the very first episode of Dexter that I keep coming back to. It's when Dexter drives through the streets of Miami at night, narrating his own existence. He says something about the city looking different after dark, how the same buildings, the same streets, The same people all take on a different quality when the sun goes down. Everything familiar becomes slightly unfamiliar. Everything safe becomes slightly dangerous. The world doesn't change. Your perception of it changes. I think that's what the Dexter franchise does to its audience, and I think that's why it endures. It doesn't change the world. It changes how you see it. After watching Dexter, you look at the quiet coworker a little differently. You wonder about the neighbor who's always polite but never quite present. You think about the gap between what people show you and what they actually are. The show doesn't make you paranoid. It makes you observant, and observation, attention to the details that most people overlook, is exactly what Dexter Morgan is best at. The franchise has always been about seeing. Dexter sees blood patterns that other forensic analysts miss. He sees the darkness in people that their social masks hide. He sees the cracks in the justice system where guilty people slip through. And the audience learns to see through his eyes, to notice what he notices, to pay attention to the details he pays attention to. That's why the mysteries of this franchise are so satisfying to discuss, because discussing them is an act of seeing more clearly. Every rewatch reveals something new. Every conversation with another fan opens a perspective you hadn't considered. Every new series adds another layer of detail that makes the previous layers richer and more complex. The shipping container, the blood slides, the dark passenger, Harry's code, the Bay Harbor butcher, Trinity's bathtub, Deb's impossible choice, Harrison's inherited darkness, the endings that keep being rewritten, the question that will never be answered. These mysteries belong to all of us now. They're part of the shared vocabulary of modern television. And as long as people are talking about them, debating them, rewatching the show to find new clues, the franchise stays alive. Not because of corporate decisions or renewed contracts, but because the stories are good enough to survive in people's minds long after the credits roll. Dexter Morgan once said he didn't know what made him the way he is. After 20 years, 8 seasons, 3 revival series, and a prequel, we still don't know either. And that's exactly how it should be. The best characters are the ones you never fully understand. The best stories are the ones that leave room for one more conversation. And the best nights are the ones where you drift off thinking about something that matters to you, even if it's just a television show about a guy in Miami with a boat and a very particular morning routine. Thank you for being here tonight. Good night. And if you happen to dream about Dexter Morgan, I hope he's making breakfast. That opening credit sequence is honestly one of the most comforting things in all of television. The way he slices the ham, the way he ties his shoes, the way the blood orange spatters against the plate. Normal activities rendered slightly sinister, rendered completely watchable. That's the magic of Dexter. Everything is normal, everything is suspicious. And you can't stop watching. Sleep well. I'll see you next time. And since I have you for just a few more moments, let me leave you with one final mystery to carry into sleep. It's not one from the show, it's about the show. Jeff Lindsay, the author of the original darkly dreaming Dexter novel, created a character that outlived the source material in every conceivable way. The television adaptation diverged from the books after season 1, taking Dexter in directions Lindsay never imagined. The novels continued on their own path, eventually introducing supernatural elements that the show deliberately rejected. And the franchise kept going long after both the novels and the original series ended, carrying Dexter forward through revivals, prequels, and sequels that owe more to the show's mythology than to Lindsay's original vision. The mystery is what happens to a character when they outgrow their creator. Dexter Morgan now belongs to dozens of writers, showrunners, actors, and millions of viewers, each of whom carries their own version of who Dexter is and what he means. The character has become larger than any single interpretation, any single series, any single ending. He exists in the space between all of them, a composite figure assembled from conflicting visions and competing ideas about what a serial killer can be. Is the Dexter of Season 1 the same character as the Dexter of Resurrection? In some ways, yes. Michael C. Hall's performance provides continuity. The internal monologue connects all iterations. The code endures. But in other ways, they're fundamentally different characters shaped by different writers with different ideas about morality, consequence, and the limits of audience sympathy. That multiplicity is, I think, the franchise's final and most enduring mystery. Dexter Morgan is not one character. He's 100 characters overlapping and contradicting each other, existing simultaneously in the minds of everyone who has ever watched the show. Your Dexter is different from mine, and both of ours are different from the one Jeff Lindsay first imagined in a novel published in 2004. That's the kind of mystery that never gets solved, and that's the kind of mystery that makes for the best dreams. Good night, for real this time.